My work involves some pretty heavy-duty skin retouching. I'll show you how I use ToneLab to tackle some of the hardest stuff. So in ToneLab Processor, I'm going to process my image. Now remember, this doesn't make it look any different. It just breaks it up into tone and texture layers so that it's easier for me to work on. Great, so I'm going to set the contour somewhere in here like the 25 range. What I'm looking for when I'm choosing my contour value is for all the stuff that I would normally clean up with my clone stamp tool to leave. I don't want to see it in this version that I'm looking at just tone. That's how I choose my contour value. Click OK. Great, the image is processed, and now we're just going to move into Workspace and start working on tone. I'm going to turn the texture off so I'm not distracted looking at the texture cleanup that I'm going to tackle separately. This just lets me see what's on my tone layer that I'm going to clean up with my mixer brush tool. And the great thing about ToneLab is you'll notice the tool's changing. When you switch between tone and texture, it's going to choose the right tool for you to be working on in both texture and tone. And I can change the brush tip by opening my brushes palette and choosing one of the ToneLab custom brush presets that ship with ToneLab. I'm going to set it to the tone pusher because this is a textured brush tip, and that's really, really good for working on the tone in images with models and skin. You can just close your brushes. So notice you can see the brush tip here, and ToneLab's done a good job of setting up the perfect settings for mixer brush. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what the mixer brush does. I'm just going to make a really broad stroke, and you can see how the texture gets pushed around. That's the beauty of mixer brush, is it just basically mixes the pixel information together. So for me, this is so much easier than using something like the clone tool or the healing brush, because I'm just basically using mixer brush to scrub away blemishes in the skin. Now, why do I use a textured brush tip? Because I want to maintain some kind of texture in the skin, because that keeps it from looking fake. The problem with skin retouching using, traditional frequency separation techniques is people usually will make the mistake of trying to run some kind of blur on the skin or using a really soft brush tip that just makes it look kind of fake. So the solution to that with ToneLab is using our custom texture brush presets. So, it looks a little crazy when you're just looking at tone. So let's turn the texture back on. And I'll do them before and after of the tone. Now, those are really quick results in a really short amount of time that using previous techniques would have taken me so much longer to do. Now, if it's too weird to just be working on tone with the texture off for you, you can totally work on tone with the texture still on. I'll show you what that looks like. You can even be a little less precise when you have the texture on, because it does a good job of covering up any of the places that you might have added too much texture or made a mistake. So you might even be able to hear the pin on my tablet. That's how quickly I'm moving this this cursor around, is I'm just sort of scrubbing away these blemishes. And you might notice my brush tip changing size. I'll change it around a little bit. You also might notice the brush tip here changing direction. That's how I created these custom brush presets, is they basically spin around as you brush with them, so that it eliminates any repetition that you might be able to pick up with your eye in the texture. So I don't know about you, but if I was doing traditional dodge and burn techniques on skin still, and I was faced with an image like this, I'd be looking at a pretty long day. And I don't like long days that are made up of really tedious work. And that's really what made ToneLab essential for me. So I needed a way to work using some of these frequency separation methodologies, but I needed it to be faster and easier to do. So I love doing before and afters just to get a sense check of where I'm going. Let me zoom out just a bit. So you're still seeing some of the blemishes at this point, and that's what you should expect to see. I keep my work separate when I'm working on texture and tone. I will usually go through and do all of the tonal cleanup work first, and then go into my texture work using the clone stamp tool. And I mean, once again, since ToneLab separates texture and tone onto separate layers, you don't have to worry about screwing one up when you're working on the other. And I always think of skin retouching as just slowly peeling back distractions to basically reveal the model in a way that is much more immediate to connect with. I think that's sort of one of the guiding principles that we can remember in skin retouching, to keep from, I don't know, making changes to people's bodies or faces that maybe seem a little fake. Keeping it real is just you doing a good job of letting the viewer connect more with the subject in the photograph. I don't think of blemishes as imperfections per se, because we all have them. But in a photograph, blemishes are just visual details standing in the way of connecting with the subject. Let's do some more before and after. And if I turn texture off again, let's take a look at that. I'll often go back and forth to, leaving texture on and turning it off, because with it on, I kind of didn't know that these areas still had some unwanted variation in them. And by turning it off, I sort of just get a new view. Now, previously, using traditional frequency separation, I would have had to go in here to this nasty looking layer stack and choose to turn a layer on and off to see before and after. And that's what I wanted ToneLab to do for me. I don't want to mess with that ugly stack of layers. I just want a simple minimal interface to be able to move as fast as I can using these tools. Now, if you want to move a little faster, you can go up here to your flow setting and you can turn it up a bit and it'll be a lot stronger. Check that out. At higher amounts, you have to be a little bit more careful so you don't move the areas of tone too far out of their existing tonal range. You just sort of want to blend the edges, because when we make dramatic changes to tone underneath the texture, sometimes the texture will look a little floaty. And that's usually the thing that people point to when they think that frequency separation looks fake. It's just that the person doing it wasn't understanding what the problems are and how to use enough, how to be careful enough to not create fake looking skin. The way the light falls on the face, you want to really still preserve that. You just want to refine where that light catches the edges of distractions, the edges of blemishes on the face, the edges of makeup. Now with the texture off, I don't really have a sense of what that interaction with the texture is looking like, because I'm just seeing this. So it's good to get a check occasionally that you're not pushing it too far or creating any weird looking areas, but I think that's pretty decent. So I mean, I really only took like 10 minutes or so working on this face, and those are pretty good results as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to switch over to working on texture. Notice that now that I'm on texture, the right layer is selected. You don't even have to worry about that. And it gave me the clone stamp tool at full opacity. And for skin, I usually keep the clone stamp pretty small, but I don't have to be super careful about where I'm sampling from, because it's not sampling any of the tone. Notice this sample is set to current layer, so it's gonna only sample other texture that's on the texture layer. So you can kind of just not worry about it too much. The thing to remember when you're cloning on the texture layer, you do kind of want to clone from similar types of texture. I mean, you can see right here, the light is catching the surface of the face, and you see these specular highlights that have a certain character. Over here, the texture is really different. And over here, it's totally different. So when you're choosing where to sample from, just try to keep it in the same ballpark, basically. And see how if I like this texture and I want to continue with that, it makes it super easy to just pull that texture around. But I'll tell you what, this beats micro dodging and burning any day of the week. For me, anyway. So that was a pretty crazy blemish right there. And like, you don't even notice that. As long as you're pulling in some believable texture into the areas you're cleaning up, you can get away with a hell of a lot using ToneLab. So I'm gonna zoom back out to see how fast I can really move at this and make some big progress. And remember, ToneLab isn't just for skin. It's great for all sorts of things, hair especially. Crosshairs are a huge pain normally, but this makes it so much easier. So that's me pretty much just cruising at top speed. I call that my first pass. I like to get everything to just a unified state of cleanup and not just focus too heavily on getting it perfect on the first pass. Like I said, I just want to kind of like clean this in layers and sort of peel back the layers so we can get to, who's in the picture. Honestly, this is a complete before and after. You can see how effective distractions are at keeping you from really seeing that there's a really striking personality under it all. And I really like thinking of it exactly like that. I'm just trying to get to the essence of the subject of the photograph. So here's my pretty much final image after, I'd say, about 3 or 4 passes. It's got a little bit of additional color work done, but not much at all. I think I used a little bit of opening up in here around the eye, but the majority of this is just ToneLab cleanup using the techniques that you saw me working in. So yeah, I think overall for this image, I spent a few hours making sure there were no spots where I went too fast, and maybe clone texture from areas that that were inconsistent. That's how I like to work, is just really fast and loose up front for the first pass. Just get the speed and then slowly refine. And I kind of know I'm done when I'm able to find, this incredible person underneath a lot of distraction. So this was ToneLab for acne and blemish cleanup. It's one of the toughest things to do in portrait, fashion, beauty, retouching. But it's not just for that, it's for everything. You saw it used on crosshairs, anything that you can basically separate into texture and tone. ToneLab gives you that extra platform to just move fast and get great results super quickly.